I'm Mayor Manheimer, and I'd like to welcome you to this August 25th meeting of the Asheville City Council. All council members that'll be participating tonight and staff are participating virtually. And again, we appreciate your patience as we work through this process. We've done this several times now, so I think we're getting better at it as time goes by. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone by dialing 855-925-2801 and entering the code 7725. We are also broadcasting live on the city's YouTube channel, Charter Cable Channel 193, and on AT&T UVerse Channel 99. So for everyone who's out there tonight, welcome. For public comment, we ask callers to sign up in advance to join the live speaker queue. We will only be taking live comments from those who signed up prior to tonight's meeting. Those callers have been provided instructions on how to participate. Each caller is allotted 3 minutes to speak on each agenda item. We will hear live comments for up to 1 hour on each agenda item, if there are that many callers. As a reminder to callers, you will first hear staff inform council that you are next to speak. Then you'll hear an automated message letting you know you are unmuted and live in the meeting. You may begin speaking after the automated message. To best ensure staff can support you in case of technical difficulties, we ask that you join the queue no later than the beginning of the agenda item before the agenda item on which you have signed up to speak. So try to get in the queue no later than the beginning of the agenda item before the item on which you wish to speak. Additionally, if you have joined the speaker queue and need to disconnect before your time to speak, please hit *4 before hanging up. You can then call back in and using the same directions I just shared, and staff will enter you back into the speaker queue of your agenda item. I would like to ask those participating in tonight's public comments to follow council's rules of decorum. The rules include the following. Speakers are only allowed to speak one time during the public comment period for an agenda item. A person may speak only if they have signed up to speak in accordance with the city's procedures, and speaker substitutions at the meeting are not allowed. As I mentioned before, each speaker is allotted 3 minutes to speak, and you can't relinquish the remainder of your time to another speaker. Speakers shall refrain from personal attacks and/or threats directed towards city council, city staff, or members of the public. Speakers shall be civil and courteous in their language. Insults, profanity, use of vulgar language or gestures, or other inappropriate behavior are not allowed. Speakers should not expect council members or city staff to comment or respond to their comments directly during the meeting. Sometimes folks who are speaking ask a question in the middle of their comments, and instead what we need you to do is complete your statement, and at the end of your comments, if it's appropriate, someone may be able to answer questions or comment further, but not while you're speaking. Okay, now I'm going to go through and introduce all the council members who are participating. Council members, please make sure to mute your microphones when you're not speaking. I'm also going to introduce the staff that are participating. Council and staff, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Vice Mayor Whistler.
Good evening.
Councilman Haynes.
Hello.
Councilwoman Mayfield. You're muted.
Sorry, hello, my finger hit another button.
Councilwoman Smith.
Hello.
Councilman Young.
Good evening.
City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Good evening.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Hello, everyone.
And City Clerk Maggie Burleson.
Hello.
Okay, we'll begin the council agenda like we always do with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll please rise wherever you are for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This evening, we do not have any proclamations. Moving to the consent agenda. Council, does anyone have any questions, comments, or a motion regarding the consent agenda?
I just have a comment about item M.
Okay.
Well, item M is about authorizing the city manager to ratify the paratransit service agreement with Buncombe County and approving an amendment to the agreement to increase funding in the current contract. For the past several years, Buncombe County has been subsidizing the paratransit service offered by the city of Asheville. The year before last, they were subsidizing by around $400,000, and then last year they subsidized the city's paratransit by, I believe, $238,000. I'm just very disappointed that the county decided at this time to completely eliminate that subsidy, especially during this time where we're all experiencing budget issues, and the fact that the county selected this time to completely take their subsidy away. I'm just very disappointed, and it doesn't feel very partnership-like.
Thank you.
And Esther, I've got just a couple of comments I want to make. Nothing big. I just want to remind folks that there's still a lot of good stuff happening at the city. I know it can be hard to think about that or remember that, but on our consent agenda today, we have movement on a number of our priorities. And so I just want to flag those for you. Number one, we have both we're lowering speed limits on a bunch of neighborhood streets and closing a bunch of streets to through trucks, and we're building sidewalks. So all of those are getting at pedestrian safety, which has been a priority for us for a long time. We are approving the contract with the Green Built Alliance to manage the Blue Horizons project, which is going to be a key factor in moving us toward clean energy, renewable energy, and continuing to implement energy efficiency in low-wealth houses, low-wealth homes. So that's a key strategy for us as well. We're ordering 2 new buses. They're hybrids. I know everybody wants electric. I want electric. But until somebody builds a 30-foot electric bus, we're going to be using hybrids. So that's always good, expanding our fleet. And then finally, we are allocating money, operating funds, to the Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust to help them get a little more stable on the operational side, so that they can do what we created them to do, which is play a key role in advancing affordable housing in our community and creating a new model of really permanently affordable housing that we just don't have right now. So I was just pleased to see all of these things on the agenda, and again, just wanted to remind everybody that the good work and the work on a range of council priorities does continue. Thanks.
Anyone else have any questions or comments or a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the consent agenda.
This is Councilman Young, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda. We do have 3 people signed up to speak on the consent agenda. So staff, do we have anyone in the caller queue?
Yes, our first caller is Grant Millen.
Grant Millen. I'm a longtime Asheville resident who has spoken at city council meetings on dozens of occasions over many years. I have a deep and diverse experience with hundreds of local civic engagement activities. I've published over 100 commentaries and letters to the editor, mostly in the Asheville Citizen-Times, and mostly commentaries. One of my favorite, more recent commentaries is "Happiness is comparing the USA with Norway's liberal democracy." It leads with this quote: "Saving humanity from hell is a task that will never end. Democracy and peace must be defended every day." And that's from Norwegian Prime Minister Erna Solberg. There are a few structural problems with the whole 30, 60, 90-day work plan. One, a super secret special anonymous lobbying group called Black Asheville Demands controls the strategy. Then apparently the city manager complies as she is able. Next, the 30, 60, 90-day work plan and everything City Asheville is doing under the banner of justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and wellness. JIW being a flag I promote alongside our national and state flags, like a new Rainbow Coalition flag, is more disableism and ableism, creating this new harmonious world with no input or space for persons with disabilities is a sin in the face of my Lord Jesus Christ. My Lord healed the disabled. They were in front of his ministry all the time. The city manager, Mayor Mannheimer, and each city council member and all City of Asheville staff places the disabled on a continuum of abuse, neglect, abandonment, and omission. Thank you for taking appropriate and immediate remedies. I asked City of Asheville to produce an anti-poverty strategy in 2015. No one has done that. No one, not Mayor Mannheimer, not the city manager at the time, no members of city council thought that was important. I think hearing Asheville's African-American community is both rational and just. I think I could get really depressed living right on the edge of the Asheville's African-American census tract, and the community centers like Wesley, Grant, Southside Center might as well be on Mars. There's no community assets like grocery stores, even for all of us to meet. And finally, the police abolition movement is a bust. The money saved by cutting the APD budget isn't enough for all our needs. Why focus small, go big? Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Robin Funston from Inca.
Hi, Council. Thank you for taking my call. My name is Robin Funston. I live in the Inca Candler area, and I have some specific comments about items G, L, and S on the consent agenda. G, hearing that there's a public hearing close to the unopened right-of-way on Gale Street set for September 22nd. Wondering if that's the day that the public hearing for the budget will be. There tends to be many other public hearings at the same time as issues where the public is showing up with a lot to say. So I'm urging you to not pack the same meeting with a budget hearing with other presentations and public hearings. And I'm really looking forward tonight to hearing you speak very specifically about the public engagement process that you will be undergoing with the upcoming budget hearing, because there has to be some sort of public engagement process. As far as item L, I want to just thank you for realizing that the ending the moratorium on new hotels at this moment, while we are in a pandemic, and also in the process of living up to the commitment of the resolution, the reparations resolution that y'all passed a few weeks ago, and appreciate seeing that this is being suggested and that you will have some public comment coming up. So very much appreciate that. And then item S, just thank you for the rental assistance resolution. Wondering what the next steps are for the city for you each to specifically using your power to communicate directly to landlords, especially. How is this urgent necessity being made clear to them so that they actually heed the warning that you are naming, and so that it's essential right now for people's lives to be able to live safely where they are. Thank you so much for your time.
Mayor, that was our final caller.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'm going to take a roll call vote as is required during virtual meetings. The first, okay, so I'm going to do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Whistler.
Aye.
Councilman Haynes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mayfield.
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith.
Aye.
Councilman Young.
Aye.
And aye. All right, so that is the consent agenda. Next, we have a few presentations tonight. The first up is the manager's report on the 30, 60, 90-day plan from, and our city manager, Deborah Campbell, will speak on this item.
Good evening again, and thank you, Mayor. As the presentation comes up. Next slide, please. So since June the 9th, city staff has prepared a 30, 60, 90-day work plan. And since that time, we've been providing you with updates, as well as updating the community on the work that we've done. This plan was developed in response to numerous requests from the Black Asheville Demands Coalition to address racial justice and economic inclusion issues. And we heard a comment from Mr. Millen earlier about who is this group. It is a coalition of leaders within our community. And I believe that the issues that have been raised, we know are issues that are generally important to a lot of people in our community. This work plan, and that's why we have devoted the amount of attention and focus on trying to respond to these issues. The work plan reflects not when we would finish, but when we would start working on some of these requests. Next slide, please. And so what I'm going to do over the next probably 6 or 7 slides is to just bring you up to date on those items that were requested and the time frame in which we said that we would start working on them, and try to give you kind of an update on what has transpired. So the first item that we said we'd undertake within the 30 days from that June 9th meeting date was a resolution to remove the monuments and the creation of a task force. As you can see, we've shrouded the Vance Monument. The Lee Monument has been removed, and the task force has been appointed. They actually had their first meeting last week, and that was an orientation meeting. And so that work will be ongoing for the next several months. The second item was work with the community on renaming of streets. We have met with the African American Heritage Commission, and we're going to continue community engagement and outreach to really finalize the definitive next steps. The African American Heritage Commission said that they did not feel that they could take on the full responsibility of this initiative. So we will be reaching out to other groups and organizations and really trying to focus on a time frame and organization to work with to finalize the work on the renaming of the streets initiative. Next slide, please. This is one that I'm actually really excited to share with the community. And this was within 60 days that we would start an initiative, which we've done for about 13 to 14 months, is partnering with Asheville City Schools and Buncombe County to address opportunity gaps. We have been working with the Asheville City Schools, mainly Parks and Recreation, to create what we're calling community learning centers or learning pods in our city facilities. Asheville City School teachers will provide educational instructions, Park and Recreation will offer recreational activities, and we are essentially targeting Black and Brown students, especially those in our public housing communities. These learning centers will operate 7 days a week, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. What we learn from Asheville City Schools is that a number of kids during the advent of the onset, I should say, of the pandemic, we lost touch with a number of these students. And then we had the summer break. So we know that there are lots of opportunities, we hope, to reconnect and to help bridge that learning gap that has occurred over those number of months. And as I said, we're really excited about this partnership, and we will be providing you with a lot more detailed information about the launch date. We're doing some things on an experimental basis toward the end of August, and then launching full speed ahead the second week of September. Next slide. Initiate conversations with the district attorney's office regarding the probation decision for Mr. Hickman. We have been working with the DA's office, and that is being spearheaded by the city attorney's office, and those conversations are ongoing. The fifth initiative is the one that I think most of the community, and I dare say even our own internal staff in our organization, is most interested in, which is the defund the police by 50%. This is one that I provided a more detailed update at our last meeting, and I'm going to go into a lot more detail toward the end of this presentation. But essentially, it is defund, divest, and invest strategy. And as I said, I'll be giving some more detailed information about that one just shortly, particularly the community outreach. Next slide, please. So within 90 days, there is work currently underway on these initiatives, providing protocol practices, resource allocation, a lot of data regarding equity and inclusion, utilize best practices to recruit people of color, developing race and gender conscious policy in response to the disparity study. That policy will actually come to council for review on September the 8th at our next meeting. Next slide, please. So I think that, as I said, I was going to come back to this one, the defund, divest, and invest strategy in our community engagement. This is the one that, as I said earlier, there's a lot of interest in. And next slide, please. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on how we have approached this. Our step one was to get feedback on the approach from the key focus groups. And as I said earlier, at the last council meeting, I provided some detail about the focus groups and the feedback that we got, and generally what our next steps would be. Step number two, which we are about to launch, is to host community meetings. And then the third step is to report recommendations and begin implementation by the September 22nd date. Next slide, please. And so just a rehash a little bit of what we learned, and these are not all of them, but just highlights of what we learned. We heard that we should use paid facilitators, not city staff, that the conversations needed to be authentic, that we needed to convene smaller groups so that we can have opportunities for genuine input, use lots of different outreach mediums, questionnaires, blogs, face-to-face meetings, and make a special effort to hear from those in impacted populations, particularly focusing on Blacks, Indigenous population, and Latinx. Next slide. So hopefully, as I go through and discuss the process moving forward, it reflects some of the lessons learned. And so facilitation services, we heard that we needed to reach out and recruit paid facilitators, that staff shouldn't be doing it. Since our last meeting, we issued a request for interest. We posted it on August the 7th. We got 6 proposals that were submitted, and this was, I will admit, it was a short turnaround. By August the 14th, we sent to local groups, 10 of them to be exact. We had only 2 responded. We had an interdepartmental team that selected the 2 teams. The costs for the services are not to exceed $10,000 for both of the teams, not $10,000 apiece, but the total of up to $10,000. Next slide. The facilitator teams that have been selected is Shemeka Ebony Coleman out of Raleigh. And this is a combined team, Glenn Thomas and Christine Edwards, and they are an organization called Amplify. Next slide, please. So the public engagement process, those 2 teams have agreed to deliver us these types of services. They will hold virtual meetings, small group, in-person meetings. The facilitators will connect with and focus on the most impacted. You can see the list. We're going to also have street teams who will go out into the community and meet people where they are. The facilitators have also included some opportunities to provide professional development for a limited number of people representing those most impacted groups. And what that means is they're going to actually team with some local people, pay them to help them facilitate and have these conversations, important conversations around public safety services in our community. City staff then will provide surveys, questionnaires, blogs that will mirror the facilitated experience. That is, the questions that will be asked at the in-person or virtual discussions, we will have surveys and questionnaires also that will be placed all over this community, because our goal is in a short amount of time, in a very intense kind of process, is to use as many opportunities to have outreach to the community in a variety of different types of settings. Next slide, please. And so when will we start? We're going to launch our website this week on the 27th. The next following week, we're going to have our first virtual community engagement meeting. And then the week of September the 7th will be where we have some very intensive, numerous types of engagement opportunities that will be virtual community meetings as well as some in-person small group meetings. Again, we're going to focus on the most impacted groups. Next slide, please. And so our step 3 is, again, to report the recommendations and implementation strategies by September the 22nd. I cannot express enough that this is the beginning of our conversations. This is to get us a budget for this fiscal year. 2 months later, we're going to start our next conversations for the next fiscal year. And I said, if necessary, I know that it will be necessary for us to continue these conversations. And it may be the next fiscal year that we continue these conversations as well. Next slide, please. And so usually I put key takeaways, and I've encouraged staff to put key takeaways at the beginning of presentations. But I wanted to conclude and end on this slide. Our city is operating in unprecedented times, and we're being challenged with things that are happening to us all at the same time: economic, social, racial, and public health issues that we're being confronted with and having to address all at the same time. People are experiencing, and I dare say expressing, valid feelings of sadness, anger, fear, and uncertainty. As evidenced by the numerous requests that we've gotten from Black Asheville and the broader community, they often look to and expect local government to calm their fears, to provide resources to address their issues and concerns. Local government, unfortunately, can't always move or respond as fast as most would want us to, due to complexity of the issues and our available resources. But what I'm here to do this evening is to reassure the community that we hear you and commit to working with you for as long as it takes to make our city better for all people. And so essentially, the takeaway from all of this is we know that expectations are extremely high, that you want us to move very, very quickly, but we are being extremely cautious, very deliberate, and we hope that you will bear with us, that you will participate in our engagement opportunities, and we are trying to provide them in a number of different ways to encourage that level of participation and communication. So with that, I will close, and I will see council if you have any questions. Thank you for your attention and time.
I do have a question. Deborah, how will people know about these public engagement opportunities?
So on our webpage and through direct mailings and all kinds of communication mediums, we are going to have specific information about those opportunities.
Okay, so people, for the most part, should just be focused on the website, and I assume that will be easily accessible from the city's homepage.
Absolutely. Website, our local media, direct mailings, postcards, AVL alert, any way that we can get the word out, we will be using those avenues.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
You mentioned that there'll be ongoing conversations even after our budget decision concerning reimagining police. Do you plan on using the same organization or this contracted group to continue the conversations beyond September?
Ms. Smith, that hasn't been decided. We will see how well they are received by the community, and we will make that determination as we move forward. But I'm sorry.
And the reason I brought that up is because thank you for mentioning a lot of the emotions that come along with these topics, because I can imagine that just on the surface, just starting the conversations, we'll be kind of managing some of the stories, some of the experiences, and we might not have the product that we're looking for, even coming up to this budget decision in September. And I don't want the people to be disappointed, because it is going to be a process. And it's going to take some hard work. And that's why I suggested maybe looking into using the same organization if they are favored by the community going forward, because they're just going to be able to scratch the surface, because we don't have a lot of time.
We don't, and I really want, again, and I've been trying to be very, very direct and and maybe not direct enough. This process will be an evolutionary process for our community from the perspective of, right now we're looking at only a conversation around, do we defund the police by 50% now, or is it an ongoing dialogue of how do we deliver public safety in our community? And that's a much broader conversation than what do we do with the police's budget? And those are the conversations that we want to have with the community. And I know that there is laser focus on we need to impact and affect the police's budget. I get that. And we are so willing to look at that. But I'm hoping that we can get the community to look more broadly at public safety in our community, because what we do know is that issues related to mental health and poverty, those are broader issues than the police. And we're hoping that we can look at this holistically. And you're right, Ms. Smith, it is a very complicated conversation. It has to be ongoing, and we can't fix it in less than 30 days, but we certainly can begin. I think we can have a good beginning.
And that's the conversation that, the broader community needs to hear, because advocacy for this immediate thing, it may not come because our focus is really talking to the people who are most impacted.
That's right.
And the individuals who are most impacted are going to vary even in the definition of defund and what they need and what their communities need. So I hope everybody's going to be listening. I hope everybody is going to be patient, and the focus is not going to be on what we feel needs to happen from our perspective. But when we are able to listen to a lot of different stories, because Blackness and being poor is not a monolith. Everybody has a different experience. Everybody has different needs. So we're going to have to be patient beyond even what the national cry is. This is Asheville. We're going to have to be very specific to what the people in Asheville need, what the communities need, and what they suggest. And guess what? We might not get at that by September. So I don't want, more hell to break loose. And I respect everybody and how they protest. And I'm not here to shame or blame, but I'm telling us to really be patient with one another, listen, and know that we're all in this together.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
Anyone else have any questions or comments on Deborah's presentation? Okay, thank you. The second of three presentations for this evening is going to come from the city attorney, Brad Branham, and he's going to talk about the Asheville Police Department protest response evaluation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and good evening, everyone. Tonight, I want to give the council an update regarding the findings or the direction from a recent public safety committee meeting. On July 28th, this committee met and voted on several recommendations for consideration for the full council or for continued work by city staff and the committee regarding a variety of public safety issues. Now, the primary element that came out of that recommendation involved the previously discussed evaluation of the Asheville Police Department's response to the protest here in the city. Now, council, as you know, had originally requested a two-pronged approach towards this evaluation. The first part being an internal review of the decision-making process to be performed by my office, and then a second outside full evaluation of the police activities in response to the protests to be performed by an agency that the city would contract with. Thereafter, council made the determination that it would be in the best interest of the city not to move forward with that external evaluation. As a result of this, the Public Safety Committee took up the issue and reviewed the alternative options and made a series of recommendations. The first recommendation on this particular element is for the city attorney's office, with myself as the primary staff member, to finish and then present the internal review report that will be finished now with council's direction, and present it to this committee at your next council meeting on September the 8th. The second recommendation element was that APD would now perform its own full after-action review of the events and officer conduct during the protest. And this would include a report to the council and any necessary and warranted discipline of police officers would flow directly from this report. However, it's important to note that the existing state laws regarding personnel privacy will place certain limits on what can be shared publicly. Now, upon these recommendations by the committee, I can say that APD has already started its internal after-action evaluation process. For my own part, I can say that we are closing in on completing the city attorney's internal review. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, we do plan on presenting that to this council in both written and presentation form at your next council meeting on September the 8th. The second recommendation that came out of the Public Safety Committee involved the release of certain portions of body cam footage that were collected during the protest. Now, this particular action requires direction from the full council and not just the committee, so we will be taking up that issue a little later. The final three elements that were proposed, or recommended, I should say, from the committee were essentially these three things. Number one, a methodology to seek expert advice and opinions, recommendations on best practices for the future of crowd control tactics. This would give a roadmap for the Asheville Police Department to be able to utilize the most modern, progressive techniques in any crowd control situations. The second element was establishing a means for participants in the recent demonstrations to be able to share their accounts with the council and publicly of the police interactions that they experienced during those events. And finally, an internal review of any potential policy changes regarding our law enforcement tactics, specifically around use of force, allowances, and crowd control itself. Regarding that last item, I can report that the city's use of force policies are actually already under review. And I'm happy to say that the governor of our state recently appointed a task force on racial equity and criminal justice. Just within the last few days, that task force released its initial recommendations, and a few of those applied directly to local law enforcement. I want to mention two of those specifically. First, the task force recommended that any law enforcement agencies in the state enact a policy to articulate a duty to intervene and report in any case where that officer may witness any excessive use of force or abuse of a suspect or arrestee. Second, the task force recommended that all law enforcement agencies within the state enact a use of force policy that, at a minimum, prohibits all neck holds in any cases unless it's absolutely necessary to protect the life of the officer. Now, that's a bit more stringent than the current policy which we have in place. So now that we have received these two recommendations, my office is already working directly with APD to review our own policies and incorporate these suggested changes from the state's task force. Now, as to the remaining items, these specifically were seeking input from outside individuals or experts on future crowd control progressive tactics or limitations, and to provide some sort of a methodology or means to receive input from those members of the community who participated in the protest and had interactions with officers. City staff intends to continue to work directly with the Public Safety Committee as the lead to bring these matters forward with more information and next steps at your next meeting in September. Now, Madam Mayor, that concludes my update, but I'm happy to answer any questions that the council may have about these items.
Any questions, comments?
Brian, I have one question. We, as I understand, we had a canceled public safety meeting that was supposed to happen today, and it's supposed to be rescheduled for the 8th. And that is still on, I assume.
I believe that is the case, Councilman Haynes.
Councilman Haynes, yes, sir. It will be on September the 8th, and we're looking at about, I think it's 10 or 10:30 as the time.
So just to clarify, the meeting today is just a postponed meeting to September the 8th, but we'll still have our regular
That is
meeting
correct.
in September. Oh, okay, thank you.
Just so I've got a question. So at the next public safety meeting is move these other few things forward. Is staff going to be bringing recommendations forward about getting expert advice on crowd control and an appropriate process for people to be able to share their stories, or is the public safety committee going to be sort of debating that on their own?
Councilwoman Mayfield, I think that we as city staff want to be bringing some additional information, recommendations to advance these initiatives for the committee. Now, certainly we will leave it up to the committee to provide additional direction or additional assignments of how they would like these things to go. However, we don't want to leave it completely to public safety to come up with these things. But we want to instead give you some recommendations and information that you can build upon from your last meeting.
And do we have a sense of, on the third point, the internal review in terms of use of force and other policies? I mean, this to me is sort of the big bucket where we can consider a lot of, should I say, sort of institutional changes. And so I just wonder how extensive that and how public that conversation is going to be. And so, for instance, one of the things that I've talked to some folks about here is, changing or expanding or improving the basic law enforcement training class that our officers have to go through, to include, other elements that are not included right now, things around, learning about structural racism, learning about implicit bias, training around implicit bias, all that sort of thing. How are we going to get to that kind of conversation?
Brad, if I could jump in here, we think some of that, Julie, may come out as a result of our conversations around reimagining public safety. There are going to be lots of different, we think, avenues or opportunities for us to bring that information to council, but we think I understood it correctly, that we would bring that information to public safety. Public safety would review, then make a recommendation to full council. But yes, staff will be reaching out to experts, bringing those experts in to, well, I don't know how in they will be, but virtually or whatever, to have that exchange of information. And we hope that this will occur at very low or no cost to the community. They will be providing examples of best practices from other communities. And as a result of the internal review that APD will do, we will also look to see and assess if there should be changes made within APD's policy, in addition to the reimagining public safety.
Okay, great, thank you. And you said the public safety meeting is when? Next?
It is September
the 8th?
September the 8th, and yes, and Ms. Smith is correct. It was rescheduled from today.
At 10:30 a.m.?
We think it's going to be at 10:30.
Okay. And I guess I would just say to members of the public, who are following this, this is a chance for you to provide some input. I feel certain that a lot of people have done their own research on, sort of better crowd control measures. And I hope you'll bring that, you'll communicate that to us or bring it to public safety. And also, I think some ideas about how people can tell their stories. This is, a public. It strikes me. I mean, this is inviting people to come to a public meeting and giving them 3 minutes to talk about their stories is not the right thing, right? So this is something that we don't normally do as a government. We don't. This is sort of the soft side of of letting people share a broad range of information and emotions and experiences with us, which is not normally what we do. It's not clear to me the right venue or forum for that. And so I really would ask people in our community who maybe have more experience with that to give some thought to that and provide some feedback to us on how that might work.
And Ms. Mitchell, as we are looking at kind of best practices and having experts come in, we will certainly ask about if there is any knowledge of other communities that do this and how do they do it. And I think we'll be able to get a menu of approaches if they're out there. If not, we'll listen to the community and try to figure out how to create that opportunity here locally.
Any other questions or comments on this topic before we move on to the final presentation? Okay. The final presentation isn't really a presentation, but it is an update on the city council vacancy, and I'm going to provide that update. As you know, Vijay Kapoor has now resigned, and we have a council vacancy, and our city attorney presented to us at our last meeting, I believe it was our last meeting, the process for filling the vacancy. And by law, this council is required to appoint the vacancy. We have received 30 applications. We opened this up for an application process and we allowed people to apply. And we had 30 people apply for the vacancy. Council was asked by the city clerk, who's sort of behind the scenes managing this process, to provide her with 2 names of people that we wanted to see interviewed for the city council vacancy. And so council submitted their picks to the city clerk, and she tallied those all up. And the following people have been selected to be interviewed. And please know that these are all the people that received even one request to be interviewed. There was some, as you can imagine, some overlap among council. If everybody picked 2 different people, we'd end up with 12 folks to interview, but we had some overlap, and it was a small enough list that we went ahead and can interview them all. So they are Sandra Kilgore, Rob Thomas, Rich Lee, Zakiah Bell Rogers, Pratik Babka, and Antoinette Mosley. Those will be the 6 people that are interviewed by City Council. Those interviews are public. They will happen before the next City Council meeting. Each person will be interviewed for 20 minutes by the City Council in this format. So it will be virtual and available for the public to view. At our next council meeting, we will, after we interview the candidates during that same council meeting, we will vote to elect one of these people to fill the vacancy on council. That whoever is elected by the council to fill the vacancy will be sworn in at the next meeting of council, the September 22nd meeting of council. And the swearing in will be sort of a strange, bizarre virtual swearing in, but we'll figure that out. And that is the process. Are there any questions about that process? Comments? Okay.
Will we each just think of our own questions to ask? Will we each have 2 questions we can ask? What's the, just to make sure that we all get a voice and nobody dominates?
So all of these folks have also answered questionnaires that the council provided questions, and they have submitted their written responses to those questionnaires. This is an opportunity to, if you want to ask the same questions, if you want to ask something different. Generally speaking, given the time constraint, we're lucky to make it once around, but be prepared maybe with 2 questions just in case we make it 2 times around. And generally speaking, the opening question is tell us a little something about you and why you're seeking the seat. So sometimes that can have some variation in terms of how long that takes, but we've set aside 20 minutes for each candidate. So. Okay, any other questions? Yep, Keith.
May I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
The way that we handle the school board appointments is it's a separate meeting prior to the council meeting.
Right.
I would suggest that if anyone is open to it, that we do that to allow these individuals more time to answer questions. If council members would like to go a little bit more in depth in a few minutes.
Oh, no, that we will do the interviews prior to the city council meeting. Maggie, remind me of the date of the next city council meeting is on September.
It'd be September 8th, and the interviews we have starting at 2:30 in the afternoon.
Okay.
And Maggie, we'll put out information again about, since that's a public meeting, about how people can how people can watch and that sort of thing.
Yes.
No call in for that, but people can watch.
Right.
This is Gwen. There would not, there's no prohibition from us as council members or the applicants reaching out individually before that meeting, in the event that we individually would like to have a more in-depth conversation with folks, as long as we don't meet with more than, as long as council isn't meeting together. Is that correct?
Right. Anybody can speak to any of these candidates whenever they'd like to, prior to their interview or prior to the meeting. So there's no prohibition on that at all. Certainly some candidates do reach out to council. It's to be advised in some cases. So some people would say that they often have folks that are supporting them also reach out to council members. So that's fine.
And we've gotten some questions. I've gotten some questions about, how are we approaching this? What criteria are we looking for? And I think the answer to that is we all bring our own goal. We have certainly not gotten together collectively and said, here's how we're people. We're going to be making those decisions on our own, using our own lens. So if that's helpful, it's really not so helpful to the applicants, but.
Well, I mean, this is like any other political vacancy appointment. There are many times where political vacancy appointments have to be made, whether it's by the governor, whether it's in Buncombe County, every time we have the resignation of somebody elected by the county at large, and it's a partisan seat, it's the party that appoints the vacancy. So, there's many different times where vacancies are appointed and they're not criteria unless it's a position that requires something like if you're a judge and you have to have a law degree or something like that. So no, this is the appointment of a political vacancy. So by its very nature, it's somewhat subjective to those that are making the selection. Now you can develop your own personal criteria and you can say what those are, but the candidates themselves, the only criteria is that they are registered to vote and reside in the city of Asheville. And so it's a minimal criteria. Any other questions? Comments? All right. That concludes the presentation portion of our agenda. We do have 5 public hearings on our agenda this evening. The first will be continued, as is often the case these days. So do I have a motion and a second to continue the public hearing to October 13th, 2020 to amend the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development 5-year consolidated action plan in order to assess affordable housing and community development needs and market conditions and to make data-driven place-making investment decisions?
This is Gwen, so moved.
Second, Councilman Young.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'll do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Whistler.
Aye.
Councilman Haynes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mayfield.
Aye. Aye.
Councilwoman Smith.
Aye.
Councilman Young.
Aye.
And myself, aye. Next, we have 3 public hearings regarding a tree canopy preservation ordinance. So these are all going to be related. Those 3 items are the following. The first is a consideration of amendments to the UDO regarding this preservation ordinance. The next is a consideration of an ordinance amending the fees and charges related to this same change. And third is a consideration of an initial zoning that would apply a new resource management overlay district, which is essentially a citywide overlay district to help facilitate this tree canopy ordinance. And we are going to hear from Chris Collins, who's going to present all 3 of these items. They are going to require separate votes, but we're going to hear a presentation on all of them. Yeah, Gwen, you were asking a question.
Yeah, will this be a vote that has the vote has to wait until our next meeting?
Yes, Brad, are you telling me this one is one of the ones that has to, yes.
Right.
We'll have a motion to recess it to the next meeting where we actually vote.
Right. Unless it's prohibited, it might be interesting at the end of the conversation if people there's a lot of interest in this if I am to judge by the number of emails I've gotten around this issue. It might be good if we had a discussion at the end of this to sort of indicate where we all are, so that people don't feel like they have to, because I sense where we are, so that people don't feel like, they need to spend the next 2 weeks lobbying us all again about the tree canopy.
I think what Gwen's trying to say is there's pretty broad support for this, but so don't worry, all the people that have been emailing us. But yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, so let's hear from Chris on these 3 related items.
All right. Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to present to you, as you stated, the Tree Canopy Preservation and Enhancements Ordinance Amendments. Primarily, that's composed of Article 19 of the Unified Development Ordinance. Go to the next slide, please. First of all, sorry, I'm Chris Collins with the Development Services Department. So for an overview of what we're going to look at tonight, we're going to look at what is prompting this ordinance, how the draft ordinance works, take a look at an example site, address some of the concerns that came up at Planning and Zoning Commission and other places throughout this process, and talk about the feedback cycle we plan for this ordinance to have. Next slide, please. Some of the key takeaways I'll leave you with at the end of this presentation will be that we have an ordinance that creates a new predictable and flexible requirement to preserve or install or pay a fee in lieu for tree canopy for many development types. We're going to be looking at incentives to preserving valuable existing tree canopy over planting new canopy or paying a fee, and applying a requirement for shading canopy to all developments within the city outside of 1 and 2 family residential units. All right, next slide. So why a tree canopy preservation ordinance now? We are looking, of course, to implement several goals of the comprehensive plan to slow or reverse tree canopy loss that has been shown to us by a few studies we've had lately, and to equate tree canopy production to canopy loss by development activity and create positive change in land surface temperature and urban heat issues. Next slide, please. So those things are supported by a couple of studies we've had recently that council is aware of. There was a NASA-developed study on land surface temperature in the city of Asheville. And then, of course, the city commissioned an urban tree canopy study, which documented our current inventory of tree canopy and tree canopy loss over the years. Next slide. It's also supported by at least 4 different outcomes and metrics of the comprehensive plan, Living Asheville. I won't go over each of those now, but they are mentioned here and in the report. Next slide. Some general highlights of the ordinance, some things that are kind of higher level about it is that we're allowing trees to be preserved for other UDO requirements. You'll hear people talk about building impact landscaping, street trees, parking lot landscaping. When folks are preserving trees to meet those requirements, we'll let the ordinance will allow those to be used to meet canopy requirements. We're replacing our current ground-based tree save requirements. That's important because we have a lot of ground-based requirements on development sites right now. We have setbacks, we have open space requirements, we have all sorts of ground-based requirements competing for that ground. So this takes it out of that arena. This does set up and require permits for future removal of trees only in these tree canopy preservation areas that are created by this ordinance. Not trees citywide, not every tree, but for those created in these tree canopy preservation areas. We do allow for multiple methods of calculating existing canopy. And basically that's to the tree level on smaller sites. And we allow for bigger, less intensive methods of calculating on larger sites. We've incentivized preservation over replanting with measurement flexibility and also lower total requirements. And we're offering multiple methods of compliance, which is important because that really takes us out of the arena of variances and alternative compliance and puts every development in a position to be able to comply with this ordinance. Next slide, please. There are a couple of associated changes that are coming with this that were asked for through public input while this was being developed. First of those is introducing a requirement for a developer to maintain UDO required street trees for a period of 2 years after CO. And then also one to change how we deal with speculative grading. So a change to 712 that is going to disallow mass grading, including mass tree removal on sites that don't have an approved development plan yet. So next slide. All right, so this ordinance will be applicable to the following things. We're looking at major and minor subdivisions. That's the creation of a new lot, not the adjustment of lots or anything like that. Areas that are steep slope and aquatic buffer zones. Construction of new buildings, again, not 1 and 2 family residential, but all other new buildings. New open uses of land, such as parking lots. Building expansions that are over 1,500 square feet. And open use, such as parking lot expansions over 3,000 square feet. Next slide. Okay. We've taken it through this process. We've had several encounters with stakeholders and engagement efforts. We've worked really heavily with the Urban Forestry Commission as an advisory group on this ordinance. And we've bounced a lot of the ideas we've come up with from working with that group off the Development Customer Advisory Group. That is a group of heavy users of development services, plan review, permitting services that came out of the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Development Task Force from a few years ago. We've presented and worked with the Sustainability Committee, presented to the Planning and Economic Development Committee, the Downtown Commission, Chamber of Commerce, and most recently we participated in a Greenworks sponsored public webinar to get the information out there. Next slide, please. So the easiest way to describe this ordinance to you is to kind of take you through how we would go about regulating a site, or someone would go about designing a site under this ordinance to see how the components work. So we're going to go over 4 key elements. The first of those are resource management districts. Second being canopy classifications, then canopy preservation requirements. And we're going to talk about a key element here, which is flexibility, as mentioned before, giving people many ways to comply so it's easy to comply. Next slide, please. And if you could click the arrow one more time for me. All right, so one of the first key things here are resource management districts. And this is actually a separate action item on the agenda tonight. These act as overlay districts, and we formulated those based on the comprehensive plan's future land use areas. And we're creating 3 resource management districts. First of those is a downtown resource management district, which is self-explanatory. It really follows our traditional downtown boundaries. An urban resource management district, which is composed of a lot of our traditional commercial and neighborhood corridors and areas. and a suburban resource management district, which composes a lot of our suburban form areas, so wider roads, strip shopping areas, and undeveloped areas. So the red on your map there corresponds to some of our heavier tree canopied areas in the city right now. Okay, next slide, please. So to determine a requirement here, you would cross-reference a proposed land use with that resource management district. So every project that comes through is going to be classified as a Class A, B, or C tree canopy classification requirement based on land use and resource management district. Next slide, please. The ordinance contains 2 tables that cover each one of these classes. And the next 3, possibly 4 slides will show you those tables. One thing I want you to notice about this is there are 3 columns here. The first column represents what your requirement is as a percentage of the site area in tree canopy area that is preserved. The second column is that requirement if you're installing new tree canopy rather than preserving old existing tree canopy. The third column is just simple math. It's the combination of the 2. So you'll see as you preserve more and plant less, your total requirement is lower. For instance, if you preserve completely, your requirement is 5%. If you're preserving nothing in Class A, your requirement is 10%. Next slide, please. The same goes around Class B, and I didn't mention Class A mainly is our downtown areas. Class B is mainly our urban that we on the map we saw. And the next slide, Class C is broken up into 3 separate sections based on the current level of tree canopy. If you remember, I said Class C, or suburban mostly, represents our areas with the heaviest tree canopy currently. So each one of these has a base preservation requirement of 15% of the site in tree canopy, but you'll see as we have a heavier tree canopied site, that planting requirement increases if you're replacing tree canopy. Next slide. And that goes all the way down to 0 to 40% existing canopy coverage. The third element here is on the next slide. This slide illustrates to you that incentive. You'll see the green being preserved tree canopy, the blue being planted. Again, this just clearly shows the more you preserve, the lower your requirement is. Next slide. Calculating tree canopy credits is important because this is how we determine how much square footage you get to measure that percentage for each tree. So table 719.4 in front of you on the left shows the credit given for existing trees that are preserved. These are all based on the city's preferred species list that we do maintain. These classifications are. So if someone preserves a mature large tree, they're getting 1,600 square feet of canopy to go towards that percentage from the last set of tables. 719.5 shows the canopy credit given for newly installed trees, and you'll see you get less credit for installing a new tree than preserving. Again, that is on that thread of incentivizing preserving trees over installing new trees. Next slide, please. So this is a site that doesn't really exist in the city of Asheville. This is a flat paper site, and it is in the suburban resource management district. It currently has 35% of the site covered in existing tree canopy, and it's a commercial use. Next slide, please. So the first scenario we look at on this site is full canopy preservation. So in this instance, the developer has chosen to meet the requirement purely through preserving existing trees. If you'll hit the right arrow for me. And you'll see highlighted in red here, we mentioned the trees that are already required by Section 711 of the UDO. These are vehicular use area trees and street trees. Those stay unless they're preserved to be met. At the top right, you see preserved tree canopy at 15%, which meets their total requirement. So what you see in the top right is what's gained by this ordinance over where we currently stand. Okay, next slide, please. The first thing you'll notice is that in order to meet the requirement through preservation, a 2-story building had to be built instead of a 1-story building. This shows some of the reasons people might change things up. But in this case, we are looking at a partial canopy preservation. They're preserving part of the requirement, planting part of it. If you'll hit the right arrow for me real quick. Again, highlighted in red, these are the trees that are already required by the UDO for a building of this type inside of this site type. And in the top right, you see 9.3% preserved canopy. And then you see a number of trees labeled NC, which are newly planted canopy trees. So everything at the top above the red is gained by this ordinance amendment in this example. Next slide, please. Here we have the same site under a no canopy preservation requirement. For whatever reason, they've decided to take all the trees out and replant completely. If you'll hit the right arrow for me one time. Again, we have in red our trees that are required by the UDO now, building impact, vehicular use, and street trees. And at the top, we see the trees labeled NC are all newly planted trees to meet this canopy requirement. So at the top, that's what's gained by this proposed ordinance. Okay, next slide, please. The next option they have available to them is a payment in lieu of planting. And this slide illustrates that is only available for the new canopy installation requirement number. You can't come in and say, I would have preserved 5%, but I'd rather pay. It's going to be based on that full new number. So in this case, in Class A, it's 10%, or if you preserve 3, you're paying 4%. It's really a choose your own destiny in that table. Next slide. That payment in lieu of fee determination is based on 3 components for each resource management district. There's the average square foot land cost within the resource management district, the average cost of tree installation per square foot of tree canopy, and an administrative fee to cover the cost of administration of the fee in lieu permitting and enforcement program. Next slide, please. This slide kind of shows that example site we were working with. And the numbers you see right here are if someone elected to, for whatever reason, to take out all the trees and completely pay to meet their tree requirement. And you'll see at the top right, those 3 fees broken down for a total fee. And this is in our least expensive resource management district, suburban, because again, it's based on the average square foot cost of land in the district. You end up with a relatively large fee, large enough, we think, to encourage folks to go the preservation or planting route. Of course, it is a kind of a choose your own destiny situation. A developer could choose any of the scenarios in the table in 719.3 on this slide. They could choose to preserve some of this, plant some of this, and pay for some of it. We definitely want that preservation to be the primary option and the easiest option. Okay, next slide, please. A couple of notes about payment in lieu of. Those funds must be used in the same resource management district where they're collected. The development sites in that downtown district, they've got to be used downtown, urban, used in urban, suburban, used in suburban. Those funds have to be tied to installation, administration, and maintenance of the city's tree canopy within that district again. And it does present, through policy and how we implement these fees and how they're spent, an opportunity for equitable maintenance and distribution of tree canopy throughout the city. Since the ordinance itself is really aimed at each development site, this gives us a chance to really program how those funds go out. Next slide, please. Next, I want to talk about some of the concerns that were raised at the Planning and Zoning Commission. As you know, this did come to you with a negative recommendation from that group. They were concerned about increased development cost overall, increased development costs on affordable housing, and possible barriers to constructing density in the downtown area. Next slide, please. As far as increased development costs, we, as staff, we concede that there's a chance this will increase in development cost. We were not able to come up with a way to ensure that wouldn't happen while creating a stricter tree preservation ordinance. Next slide, please. As far as affordable housing effect, staff did an analysis on projects over the last 5 years that have been recipients of the Land Use Incentive Grant. And we found that more than half of them can comply, likely could comply with this ordinance as they were planned. Now, the caveat I want to give you on that is it's kind of a rough science. Those plans weren't drawn to show compliance with this ordinance, so we didn't always have all the information we needed. Of those that did not comply as drawn, staff felt it was very likely that they could easily comply by preservation or planting rather than going with a more expensive fee in lieu of option. And in many cases, that preservation consisted of saving 2 mature trees on the site. So it wasn't anything super intense. There's an illustrative memo attached to the staff report that details this. And also, we've had a lot of feedback about shade and tree canopy and access to shade and canopy really has been demonstrated to be needed for residents at all housing cost levels. So while there may be an increased burden of adding some more trees on some developments, there is definitely a benefit that comes to the development and the city as a whole. Next slide, please. As far as possible barriers to constructing density in the downtown area, we really looked at 3 projects that are approved or in the works right now: the Cox Ashland development, Collier Avenue apartments, both of those incorporate affordable housing also, and 251 Short Cox, which was more of a smaller scale downtown residential project, or CBD residential, South Slope actually. Collier Avenue complies right out of the gate as it's planned. They're preserving trees, nothing else has to be done. 251 Short Cox has some tree preservation, which actually met its requirement as well. And Cox Ashland, we were lacking some information due to the phased approach of the final development plans, but there are several. We did determine that preservation of a small number of trees could get that development there without any further action. And there are some stands of existing trees on that site where it might be possible. Now, I don't want to confuse things. These developments would not be subject to this ordinance. We're just using them as examples. Next slide, please. As far as the feedback cycle, as staff, we really want to commit ourselves to an 8 to 12 month feedback cycle to reevaluate the results and how well this ordinance is working. We've already had some new recommendations come at us since we kind of got this too far down the line to effectively implement them for things like heritage trees and larger trees and how to deal with that. And it's just really good practice to have a feedback cycle and see how ordinances are going. So we would like to commit ourselves to that. Next slide, please. Some of the key takeaways, as we said before, I'm going to summarize that, was that we think we have an ordinance here that creates a new predictable and flexible requirement to preserve, install, or pay for tree canopy for many development types, that we're providing heavy incentives to preserve other than the other options, and that we are applying these requirements for shade and canopy to all developments within the city outside, again, not applying to 1 and 2 family houses. And the requested action, staff would request that council consider and adopt the proposed tree canopy protection ordinance and the associated fee and zoning actions. Okay. That's the end of my presentation for you.
Folks, do you have any questions for Chris?
I guess I just want to say this is very complicated, and I just really appreciate all the staff work and all the outreach, and I'm excited to get this implemented, and I do think it'll go a long way to helping preserve our tree canopy. So I appreciate all the hard work.
Yeah, I will add my thanks to that. This is this kind of thing is something that the former tree commission has been asking for over a decade. And I particularly want to thank Deborah and Brad, who came from Charlotte and brought their knowledge and wherewithal on how to make it happen. And then also, of course, Ben and you in Development Services, who were willing to make it happen as well. So it's just a testament to when you get the right people in the right place, it's amazing what can happen. So thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, we're going to open the public hearing on this item. We have 3 people signed up to speak. As Gwen mentioned, we did get a lot of emails on this, so I think we've heard from a lot of folks already, but we do have 3 people signed up to speak. So staff, if you've got anyone in the queue.
Our first caller is Steve Rasmussen. I'm sorry about that.
Hi, this is Steve Rasmussen. I'm a resident of West Asheville. And I'd like to highlight a few of the things behind the scenes here with this tree canopy ordinance that I think people in the public who are worried about it need to know. For years, we were inaccurately told that Asheville lacked the regulatory authority to protect our tree canopy, when in reality, we've had this authority since 1985 as we and city council and city staff all found out just last year as an unexpected result of an attempt by anti-regulatory zealots in the state General Assembly to gut all of our North Carolina city and county tree protection ordinances. So the industry lobbyists who pushed that failed effort made the same false claim that was used to attack the tree canopy protection amendment at last month's planning and zoning meeting. Without any proof, we have heard opponents declaring that protecting trees would prevent desperately needed affordable housing from being built. But now, as Development Services is presented, we have the objective evidence that disproves that claim. We found that, the department found that its effect on these recent proposed, permitted, and developed projects has very little expense and very little requirement to already meet that new ordinance. In short, what they're saying is that Asheville can have both the affordability and the sustainability that our city needs. The two priorities don't conflict, they intersect. And because this ordinance applies to subdivisions and not small single lot builders, we can now finally address the systemic environmental injustice that denies sheltering tree canopy to low-income housing developments, making low-income neighborhoods the most dangerously heat-afflicted in our city, as the NASA Develop study shows. So, yeah, I know on top of all these other crises of policing and coronavirus and so forth, to talk about the climate change crisis seems like a lot, but that is exactly what we're addressing with this, and that is exactly what we're going to be grateful for a few years down the line when it really starts running stormwater down our streets and our heat islands get even hotter than they already are in this city. So thank you.
Council, our next caller is Kim Roney from Asheville.
Kim Roney calling today in support of the Tree Canopy Preservation and Enhancement Ordinance amendments. First, I want to express gratitude that the intention is to incentivize preservation over replanting. That will, of course, require ongoing analysis and review. Second, please ensure that a fee in lieu is of scale to replace and maintain the impact of canopy loss. A 1-to-1 square foot replacement is not acceptable, acknowledging our canopy loss and that we're in need of canopy repair. As we witnessed with the sidewalk fee in lieu, the fee was neither high enough to incentivize construction nor enough to build a comparable length of sidewalk from our list of identified highest ranked need. Third, what I don't see here is an opportunity to address our stated climate emergency with the race and class analysis, which is sorely needed. On page 30 of the presentation attached to the agenda, a concern from planning and zoning names, quote, access to share and canopy is needed for residents at all housing cost levels, end quote. While true, this doesn't address the loss of trees in historic Black neighborhoods, and it doesn't account for trees removed for surveillance purposes in our housing authority neighborhoods. Lastly, one might hope to see a greater balance of the conversation around barriers to construction with acknowledgement of the benefit to our ecosystem and our people. This looks like setting high standards for developers, new neighbors, and businesses joining our community as they join in understanding how seriously we take the impact of development on our natural and lived environment. Thank you.
Our next and final caller is Dixie Dearman. Dixie, I've unmuted you.
This is Dixie Dearman. I'm also known as Lady Passion. You may recall me from the big tree sit that saved the magnolias from a millionaire condo developer in front of City Hall. If we had not sat there day and night through a hurricane and many other things for 3.5 months, they would not be there. There would be a big hole there, and there would be blight and nothing. And so we are runners of Covenant Old and Wild, North Carolina's oldest pagan religious nonprofit. And as such, our beliefs are about preservation of tree canopy, reduction of negative climate change. And we're aware that in our area of town in West Asheville, it has lost 33% of its tree canopy over the last 10 years, disproportionately more than North, South, or East Asheville. The tree loss continues daily, making our town dangerously hotter, increasing flooding and wildlife habitat loss, and threatening future tourism, which is Asheville's Chamber of Commerce constantly plugs and seems to be our cause celeb. Our month-long tree sit in 2008 saved the century-old magnolias and inspired the present push to document the broader urban tree canopy loss shown by impeccable sources, such as the NASA-developed Urban Heat Island study and the big symposium that we had downtown, and the city-sponsored Urban Tree Canopy study performed by Davey Tree. Yet in 2020, Asheville still lacks an ordinance to preserve our natural economic attraction. We speak for hundreds, if not thousands, of pagans and Wiccans throughout Asheville who support the tree canopy protection ordinance. Voters deserve UDO adaptations that promote sustainability and lead to the ultimate goal of zero net tree canopy loss. We ask you to nurture our tourist-luring tree canopy, protect trees that remain, and encouraging planting to restore tree loss to irresponsible building practices at the expense of all our futures. Enable Asheville, please, to be cool, green, and relevant for generations to come. Please vote yes to adopt the Tree Canopy Protection Amendment. Thank you.
I believe that is our last caller. So folks, again, because of the requirements for virtual meetings, we are not allowed to vote on this item tonight. We have to vote on it at our next meeting. And actually there are 3 votes associated with this. We do have to vote on each of the 3 items to recess the public hearing until the next meeting. So we're about to do that. But Vice Mayor Whistler, you had mentioned that this might be an opportunity for us to express our our opinion regarding the ordinance changes to the tree canopy ordinance.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to start with that? And I said this earlier, but I am in support and really appreciate all the work that the community and the staff has done on this. And I look forward to voting positively on all 3 of these, all 3 of the resolutions at our next meeting.
Ditto.
Anyone else want to express their support for this or not? Brian's giving a thumbs up. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna. Do I have a motion and a second to recess the public hearing to consider an amendment to the UDO, amending section 7-2-5 definitions, 7-11-3D, 7-11-3F2, 7-12-2E2D, and establishing a new section 7-9-1 resource management overlay district, and a new article 19 tree canopy preservation until September 8th, 2020. Do I have that motion?
This is Councilman Young, so moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. I'll take a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Whistler.
Aye.
Councilman Haynes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mayfield.
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith.
Aye.
Councilman Young.
Aye.
And myself, aye. Do I have a motion and a second to recess the public hearing to consider an ordinance amending the fees and charges manual for fiscal year 2020-2021 to establish a fee in lieu of option for tree removal, land administration installation until September 8th, 2020?
So moved.
This is Councilman Young, second.
Okay, motion and a second. Vice Mayor Whistler.
Aye.
Councilman Haynes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mayfield.
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith.
Aye.
Councilman Young.
Aye.
And myself, aye. Do I have a motion and a second to recess the public hearing to consider an initial zoning to apply the new Resource Management Overlay District to all properties located within the City of Asheville corporate limits until September 8th, 2020?
So moved.
This is Gwen, second.
Jumping the gun. Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second. Vice Mayor Whistler? Aye. You're muted.
Yeah, my mute button is being weird. Aye.
Okay, there you go. Councilman Haynes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mayfield.
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith.
Aye.
Councilman Young.
Aye.
And myself. Aye.
And Esther, can I just make one comment about there were some comments about tree protection and low-income housing. And I just want to just let everybody know that the Urban Forestry Commission has reached out to the Housing Authority Board, and there's going to be a conversation there about doing some new plantings and replantings in our Housing Authority developments.
Okay. Thank you. All right, that concludes this item. And the last public hearing item for tonight will be continued. Do I have a motion and a second to continue the public hearing to October 27th, 2020 to consider an amendment to the UDO to update open space requirements?
This is Gwen, so moved.
This is Councilman Young, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Vice Mayor Whistler.
Aye.
Councilman Haynes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mayfield.
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith.
Aye.
Councilman Young.
Aye.
And myself as mayor, aye. Okay, we have no unfinished business. We have, under new business, we have boards and commissions. I'm going to turn it over to the vice mayor.
Okay, there you go. So the boards and commissions committee met, I believe it was last week, and came up with recommendations. Once again, we had a plethora of amazing applications and a lot of wonderful interest in our boards and commissions. And I just want to thank the community. It's never easy to come up with these recommendations. We would move, the boards and commissions makes the motion to reappoint Dwayne Barton to the African American Heritage Commission. Do I have a second?
Second, Brian.
Okay. Do I have to do a roll call on this? Every single one of them?
I'm afraid you do.
Great. Okay, so I have to do this alphabetically. Okay. Councilman Haynes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mayfield.
Aye.
Mayor Manheimer. Nope, that was the wrong order. Anyway, Mayor Manheimer.
Aye.
I'll put you first next time, sorry. Councilwoman Smith.
Aye.
And Councilman Young.
Aye.
And I am an aye also. Okay. I make a motion to appoint Susan Russo Klein to the Airport Authority. Do I have a second?
Second, Brian.
Okay, so I'll do a roll call. Mayor Manheimer.
Aye.
Councilman Haynes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mayfield.
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith.
Aye.
Councilman Young.
Aye.
Great. Okay, so for the audit committee, I make a motion to reappoint Scott Powell and Scott Farkas to the audit committee. Do I have a second?
Second, Brian.
Thank you. Mayor Manheimer.
Aye.
Councilman Haynes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mayfield.
Aye.
There's something weird with your.
I know.
Oh, it sounds weird. Councilwoman Smith.
Aye.
And Councilman Young.
Aye.
Okay. So for the Board of Adjustments, I make a motion to appoint Carter Webb to a regular.
Excuse me, Vice Mayor, if I can interrupt, did you record your vote on that as well?
Oh, I apologize. Aye. Thank you. So for the Board of Adjustments, I make a motion to appoint Carter Webb to a regular seat and appoint David Angelis to an alternate seat. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Mayor Mannheimer?
Aye.
Councilman Haynes?
Aye.
Councilwoman Mayfield?
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith?
Aye.
Councilman Young?
Aye.
Great. For the Historic Resources Commission, I make a motion to reappoint
Excuse
Emily.
me, Vice Mayor, I don't think you recorded your vote again.
Once again, I apologize. Sorry. I'll put myself on the list. How's that? Okay. For the Historic Resources Commission, I make a motion to reappoint Emily Spring and Will Harnaday and re-advertise for the additional 2 vacant seats. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Mayor Mannheimer?
Aye.
Councilman Haynes?
Aye.
Councilwoman Mayfield?
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith?
Aye.
Councilman Young?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. For the Human Relations Commission, I make a motion to appoint Zakia Rogers to Betty Council's vacant seat, to appoint Renetta Waters to Miss Arena's vacant seat, to reappoint Ivan Melkor, Tiffany DeBello, I believe, Davidson Jones, and Chris Weinbrenner, and to re-advertise for the vacancies of Pearl DeBello, Michael Baycoat, and Patrick Conant. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Mayor Mannheimer?
Aye.
Councilman Haynes?
Aye.
Councilwoman Mayfield?
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith?
Aye.
Councilman Young?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. And for Multimodal Transportation Commission and the WNC Air Quality Agency Board, I make a motion to re-advertise for those two vacancies. I don't know. Do we need to? Yeah. Okay. So we just will recommend that we will re-advertise for the multimodal 5 vacancies and the WNC Air Quality Agency Board. And I guess I would make the comment right now that we would really love to see some environmental advocates look at the vacancy on the WNC Air Quality Agency Board and really urge them to apply. It's a fairly technical board, but possibly getting some folks, a person on there that has a real interest in environmental issues might help. So,
well, and can I just add that the person who's rotating off is a scientist, brings a very strong science background, and that, in my experience when I was the liaison to that was very helpful.
Right.
And Gwen, can I also ask? So there are 5 vacancies on multimodal. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it seemed like there were some qualified applicants in the pool, but you just want to wait to do them all at once instead of appointing any right now?
Well, typically the multimodal commission likes to interview and make a recommendation, and they haven't been able to do that. So I believe that the Boards and Commissions Committee was basically trying to give the multimodal commission an opportunity to do that.
I see. Okay.
So that was why. But you're absolutely right. A lot of amazingly qualified candidates.
Well, and it actually, there are only 3 on the list that I'm looking at.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I might have counted wrong. I thought there were 5 openings.
There are 5 openings, but only 3 applicants. So we actually need more applicants for the multimodal.
Right.
So.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And actually, one of those applicants has withdrawn. So yeah, we need more. You're right. I apologize.
Oh, yeah. There's one of the members who is eligible and interested in reappointment.
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
We were just going to leave that open and just do it all at once. Right.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So with that, I'm done.
Vice Mayor, I apologize for my continued interruption, but I believe there was one additional resolution which we didn't record your vote on, and it was for the appointment to the Asheville Regional Airport Authority.
Yeah.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes the regular printed agenda. Now we have informal discussion and public comment. Staff will now connect live calls from our speaker queue for informal discussion and public comment. Again, we're taking callers who signed up in advance. Callers, you will first hear staff inform council that you are next to speak. Then you'll hear an automated message letting you know that you're unmuted and live in the meeting. You may begin speaking after the automated message. If you accidentally drop out of the speaker queue, just redial the number and meeting code, press *3 to rejoin the speaker queue. You'll have 3 minutes to comment, and at the end of the 3 minutes, you will hear a bell and staff will ask you to wrap up your comment. And then we're gonna have a closed session after that, but we have 8 people signed up for public comment. Staff, if you'll play public comment.
Council, our first caller is Ann Foster of Asheville.
Hi, we haven't been allowed to speak for about a month. Please bear with me. August 1st, a group including known far-right extremists, Back the Blue, openly bribed the Asheville Police Department with $1,500 in gift cards. The bribe clearly worked, as APD did absolutely nothing while these people hid their license plates and blew through red lights. August 5th, an Asheville resident was murdered. According to a witness who tried their best to save his life and later wrote publicly about the events that transpired, APD filed with basic tasks, plainly prevented medics from helping Jackson and leaving the scene quickly. The cops' PR, of course, would later claim Jackson's death as a reason they need to keep their funding. The audacity of this is not lost to me. August 8th, APD openly protected Fraternal Order of Police President Rondell Lance, who harassed, shoved demonstrators, and falsely claimed to be a police officer. There are multiple videos of this incident circulating, including the bizarre videos Lance posted publicly on his own Facebook. August 9th, APD drug a member of the press from their car in the middle of the road and detained them for hours longer than others as a clear act of retaliation. The cops arrested people on vague charges of failure to disperse or blocking traffic. The FBI is now involved in investigating 2 recent deaths at our detention facility. One person, Jacob Biddix, was arrested at the beginnings of the protest for simple property damage. I knew Jake since we were in kindergarten. We went to school together for over a decade. To clarify, I will always firmly believe that people are infinitely more important than property. Clearly, BCSO, APD, and city leadership do not agree with me. August 20th, APD attempted to serve an ABC warrant on an Asheville man, Grant Dalton, on a city bus. After approximately 30 minutes of talking to the cops and harming himself with a knife, according to video shot by a witness at the scene, it shows that APD immediately shot him after he exited the bus. What occurred, as per usual, was the opposite of crisis de-escalation. Let it be known that the bartenders and other industry workers in our city are certainly better de-escalators than APD. There's a lot more I'd like to talk about, such as the recent absurd and blatantly intentional changes to the methods of commenting at these meetings to crush dissenting opinions, the surges in COVID cases and deaths, plainly due to unfettered tourism, the reopening of our city, coupled with losing access to free community testing, is causing irrefutable damage to citizens and tourists alike. Hotels are running at full or high capacity and not following CDC guidelines for cleanliness. Or how people are receiving less than $200 a week in unemployment when the average rental in our city is priced well beyond that. It's currently estimated that 43% of renters in NC will be evicted. Or maybe how numerous locals are being blatantly targeted and harassed by far-right extremists. But I don't have the time. If you're not ready to defund and abolish BCOS and APD and directly invest in our communities, you are not paying attention. I personally have sent you dozens of BIPOC abolitionist works and writings, and I know I'm not alone. The issues I listed directly affect your constituents. You are
Council, our next caller is Casey Campfield of West Asheville. Casey, your line is now open.
Hi, this is Casey Campfield. I'm calling to, repeat a lot of the things that the previous caller said, probably not as eloquently, but I'm addressing the state of policing in Asheville today, which I think is completely out of hand and terrifying the public. And I don't think terrifying is an exaggeration. I know a lot of people who are afraid to go to their homes, afraid to walk down the street, not because of crime, but because of the police. On July 28th, 25-year-old Hannah Guffey died while in custody at the Buncombe County Jail. The next day, 26-year-old Jacob Biddix also died while in custody. These are two kids in their 20s dying in custody. So, I mean, was there foul play? Are they not able to take care of people who are sick or mentally ill? In any case, we shouldn't be having kids in their 20s dying in our jails. That's insane. On August 20th, a mentally ill man, clearly mentally ill man, armed with nothing more than a pocket knife, who had no hostages, was on a bus alone, was surrounded by police, and then immediately shot the minute he stepped off the bus. There's footage to confirm this. Having worked at many bars in my life, I know that a capable person can take care of a situation like that with a heavy blanket and a few people assisting them. There's no need to shoot that man. I think this is a nationwide conversation that we're all having, but it's right here in our backyard. They've got to stop authorizing these kinds of use of force with our police department. August 8th, former police officer Rondell Lance was caught on camera impersonating an active duty officer while assaulting peaceful anti-racism protesters. He was then taken in and protected by the APD. These things are on film. These things are recorded. This is not hearsay. These are all things that are happening on your watch. And I want to know who's going to answer for it. The police department uses nearly a third of the entire city budget. It is by far the biggest recipient of our tax dollars. And that money is being used to terrorize, injure, and murder our citizens. I'm calling for a drastic reduction in spending on the police department. I'm also calling for an immediate firing of Police Chief David Zach, as well as independent investigations on the deaths of Hannah Guffey and Jacob Biddix and the shooting of Grant Dalton. There cannot be peace in a town filled with terror. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Elsa Enstrom of Arden.
Hi, Council. My name is Elsa, and I am a citizen of Arden, just outside of the city, but I spend a lot of time in the city and have a lot of very good friends that live there. I was actually at the protest on August 8th and saw Rondell Lance and saw what he was doing. He was antagonizing people. He was trying to illegally videotape people on his phone. He was trying to record people on his phone illegally. And he was hurling insults at us when the police officers began attacking the people on bikes who were helping protect us from cars. He helped them. He grabbed a girl and started trying to drag her towards the police. He planted a small knife in the crowd and then tried to say that one of us left it there. I would also like to point out the fact that the police put out a statement claiming that we were breaking windows and not allowing people into a hotel, the Renaissance Hotel to be specific. We were not breaking windows. I was standing there at the front, in front of the windows, with my sign chanting. We were not breaking windows. We were being peaceful. If people needed to get in and out, they were more than welcome to do so. Were we trying to make it uncomfortable for them? Yes, because you are gentrifying our city. You are running the people out of the city who have lived there for generations. And we were just doing our civic duty of standing up for people of color, standing up for the marginalized communities around here. And the police lied publicly on Facebook. I don't know how you can allow your police department to act in such a childish way. Not to mention, as other people have already talked about, the murdering of a mentally ill man on a city bus. Not to mention the assault of a member of the press. by pulling her out of her vehicle and sexually assaulting her when they were supposed to be frisking her. I also know multiple other people that were arrested on that day, one of whom was a passenger in a vehicle. An officer went around to the passenger side and unbuckled her seatbelt and pulled her out of the car. She was doing nothing. I do not understand how you can condone these actions. I too am calling for the immediate removal of the police chief. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Kim Roney from Asheville. I'm just going to unmute her. It's not working.
The budget. Our budget is a reflection of our community values as it funds our processes, plans, and policies. I hear my neighbors calling in tonight with recent examples of policing in Asheville, and my heart is broken. I know that my tax dollars are being used to harass my neighbors, and it has to stop. As part of the human family, we're currently in a violent relationship with each other that's reflective of our violent relationship with planet Earth, where we treat people and our natural resources as disposable, and the outcome is disproportionately deadly for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. I'm among those who have stood before you for years, asking to move the money in the budget to invest in long-term safety strategies. Now we hear formal demands outlined by growing coalition around Black ABL demands, a tremendous amount of work that deserves Kim Roney here this evening. As Robin mentioned in comment at the beginning of the meeting, we eagerly await the public. Good evening, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. As Robin mentioned in comment at the beginning of the meeting, we eagerly await the public-facing engagement regarding the budget. Our budget is a reflection of our community values as it funds our processes, plans, and policies. As I hear my neighbors calling in tonight with recent examples of policing in Asheville, my heart is broken. I know that my tax dollars are being used to harass my neighbors, and it has to stop. As part of the human family, we are currently in a violent relationship with each other that is reflective of our violent relationship with planet Earth, where we treat people and our natural resources as disposable, and the outcome is disproportionately deadly for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. I'm among those who've stood before you for years asking to move the money in the budget with our neighbors, to invest in long-term safety strategies. Now we hear formal demands outlined by growing coalition around Black ABL demands, a tremendous amount of work that deserves action. What I heard today in the city manager report was a call for caution, not caution and care for people who are in harm's way, but caution to prioritize the care of a system that has a history of harm, and it will continue to harm because it was designed to. The call before us in this moment is urgent, clear, and incredibly gracious, given the trauma that has been inflicted in our society and against the people of the city. There's a fear moving into the unknown as we reimagine public safety because we don't yet know what restorative justice looks like. Please consider instruction for an immediate hiring freeze extension to include APD and setting up a participatory budgeting that allows for meaningful opportunity for public input past September as we move towards a community-led strategic plan to divest from policing and invest at least 50% of our APD budget in long-term safety strategies. We're currently operating at 100%. And if we don't start to divest now, we will walk towards the budget vote September 22nd with every intention of passing a full budget. We have been extended the awareness, the analysis, the grace, and the need to not do that. Thank you.
Council, our next caller is Ben Spencer from South Asheville.
Hi there, this is Ben. Just calling, I've got several things to touch on, so I'll be as brief as possible here. First of all, I've requested multiple times to have somebody contact me at my given contact information for this comment with information regarding the resolutions and votes that actually established not only the rules of decorum, which I've requested previously, but as well as this amended online process, which seems to serve only to stifle the public critique and public comment period and create barriers to accessibility and participation to the community. Additionally, I'm still very concerned by the reduction in time unannounced at the previous budget hearing, that's as well as some of the technical difficulties that seem to have left folks without a voice. So this is again a request to be contacted with the information of the codes and what was passed regarding this format, as well as those rules of decorum again. Next, the canopy resolution, while I am tepidly in support of that, I do hope that the fees can actually be made substantial to actually encourage the leaving of our existing canopy. I also hope we can encourage that any trees that are planted are in fact native species, particularly native canopy species such as the hickories. Very important to not only think of the canopy as a mitigation against heat, but as well as to use that resolution as a way to help foster our native species. I'd like to move on to the police department, particularly the recent interagency debacle that resulted in a man being shot. When I hear your comments earlier this meeting about the need for increased training and increased bias training, that team that shot that man was specifically trained for the scenario of crisis. And I think this really just speaks to the problem that what is necessary is not an increase in training. What is necessary is not this, bias mediation. What we need to do is to reduce the number of officers on the street immediately, moving towards getting rid of that system entirely. It is rooted in classism and racism and has no place in a just society. While I like the idea of having public comment and getting information, when you turn around and make statements about using that comment to facilitate more training, it really just shows that you're not really aware of the conversation or the history around the institution of policing. And I find that quite problematic. Finally, moving on, I additionally am concerned with the discussion of modern and progressive crowd control techniques. Again, there are people there demonstrating, which is a constitutionally protected right. The idea that what we need is a better, kinder, gentler way to brutalize them is disingenuous and wrong.
Council, there are no remaining callers in the queue for this item.
Okay, thank you. Council, that concludes the agenda. We do have a closed session, but before we do that, are there any other questions, comments, anything else before we wrap up this portion? Nope. Okay, Councilwoman Smith, I think you've got the motion for the closed session.
I do. I move that Asheville City Council go into closed session for the following reasons: to prevent disclosure of information that is privileged and confidential pursuant to the laws of North Carolina, are not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of General Statutes. The statutory authorization is contained in North Carolina General Statute, Section 143-318-11A1. The laws that make the information privileged and confidential are North Carolina General Statute, Section 143-318-10E, and North Carolina General Statute, Section 160A-168. Also, to consult with an attorney employed by the city about matters with respect to which the attorney-client privilege between the city and its attorney must be preserved, including but not limited to a judicial action. The statutory authorization is contained in North Carolina General Statute, Section 143-318-11A3.
Second, this is Gwen.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I will do a roll call vote. my roll call. Okay. Vice Mayor Whistler.
Aye.
Councilman Haynes.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mayfield.
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith.
Aye.
I'm sorry. Councilman Young.
Aye.
And myself, aye. Okay. We will now go into closed session and we will adjourn from that closed session. We are adjourned from this portion of the meeting.